Hello everyone. So sorry guys, I was not keeping well yesterday, so I didn't do anything on day 16th. So today I will try to make up for yesterday and try to extend today's session. Let's see how it goes. So that's why it is day 16 and 17. So whatever my agenda was to do yesterday, I will combine it with today's session and let's proceed with our so this week, the 5 days, right? So we already lost one day. This is for uh, speaking sessions. I need to practice more on speaking and with fluency and all that aspects of it, right? So let's go through the theoretical sessions first from our guide. So let's do it from the course that we have. The first part will be let's start with the overview and how that is conducted and all that details.
Hello, it's so great to have you here right now. You've just completed the writing section of our course. You've already covered the section of the. Okay, so on the IELTS speaking section of the test, you have three tasks, or sometimes you'll hear me say that you have three parts. In task number one, we like to call that the introduction and interview. Basically, that's what it is. You're going to be sitting across from the table with an examiner, one-on-one, just you and the examiner. Don't be nervous, relax, because you've done an interview before. The examiner is going to be asking you some general questions in the beginning about yourself, where you're from, maybe about your family or your housing situation, and then they're going to move into some more specific topics, maybe dealing with music or street markets or plants, flowers, perfume, something like that. Task number one is really short. It probably normally takes around 4 to 5 minutes to finish it up. But then after you finish, you're going to move into task number two. This is more of a long term. This is what you call the long term. In task number two, you're going to be given a topic card. And on that topic card, there will be 3 to 4 prompts that go under a question. So it may ask you talk about a time when somebody cheated or lied to you. And then under that, it'll be 3 or 4 prompts in terms of information they want you to cover. You'll have 1 minute to take notes. And then after that 1 minute is up, you'll be given 2 minutes to give your response. Now, in this task number two, the examiner is not going to ask you any questions. You're going to speak for 2 minutes uninterrupted. After task number two is finished, you then move into task number three. And task number three is more of a discussion. Okay, it's more of a discussion. That means you and the examiner will be talking back and forth. It's not where you're going to just speak for 1 minute or speak for 2 minutes without being interrupted. The examiner can jump in and ask you another question because it is a discussion. Now, part number three or task number three is going to be on the same topic as task number two, the exact same topic. So if task number two was about languages, then task number three will also be about languages. So you heard me earlier just kind of go over some of those general basics of task 1, 2, and 3. The speaking test will only last for about 12 to 14 minutes. The examiner has a fixed time. They have a fixed time. They can't talk to you for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. They are given a fixed time to be able to ask you the questions they need to ask you and go through all 3 parts of the exam. The goal of the examiner is to assess your speaking ability. That's why sometimes they're not going to let you just speak for 2 minutes on one question in part number one. They need to stop you so they can move forward and assess your ability in different contexts. The examiner is more concerned about how you say something more than what you say. What you say only matters when it comes to being within the context of the question. If you go outside the subject of the question, or really if you go outside the specific question itself, that's when what you say matters. Now, you're graded on your fluency, grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary. They do not grade your ideas. Sometimes students like to ask me, how was my idea? Were my ideas good? It doesn't matter. Nobody cares about your ideas. Your ideas only matter if you go outside of the context of the question. Now, there are 3 sections to the speaking test. Number 1, as I just told you, is the interview. Your goal is to provide specific, well-explained responses. Part number 2 is the uninterrupted speech. As I said, you're going to get a 3 to 4 part prompt. You get to prepare for 1 minute, and then you speak for 2 minutes uninterrupted. Then part 3 is what we call the follow-up. The follow-up. The questions are the same subject as part number 2, but they're longer, more challenging, more complex. Now, let me give you a little bit more to really go through a lot of training to be able to be an examiner. This examiner is not your friend. They're not your enemy. They're there to do an evaluation. They are certified by the British Council or Cambridge. They can be a native speaker or a non-native speaker. The examiner will decide the score. Really important for you to understand that. This person Really important for you to understand that this person that from you is going to be the person to decide the score. A couple more things. I told you about the examiner's job, which is to get enough language to assess you, right? That's why they're going to interrupt you. And also that the time is restricted. The reason why the time is restricted is the British Council, Cambridge, they want to make sure that everybody is given equal. It's equal for everybody. You can't give one person 25, 30 minutes to talk and give somebody else 10 or 15 minutes to talk. Everybody is supposed to fit within the same time frame. So the time is limited. Okay, now, how can you succeed in this course section? Well, for the speaking course section, it's very important that you take notes. I'm going to give you a lot of information. And just like an in-person course, if you're sitting in front of a lecturer in the classroom, you take notes. Taking notes on the key points will help you to recall this information and be able to apply this information at a later date. Also, I'm going to use a lot of words and phrases within context. I'm not just going to give you a list without explaining to you how to use that language. So really learn a lot of these essential phrases and words and be able to practice using them. Number 3, do not memorize. When I give model answers, don't sit there and try to memorize what I say. Examiners can always tell when you're giving them something you tried to memorize. You can tell the difference. There's a big difference between giving a natural speech or naturally talking and giving a memorized answer. I always hear this in part number 1 when people are talking about where they're from, or they're talking about where they live, or they're talking about if they're a student or if they have a job. I hear these memorized answers, and it's not impressive to a grader, so don't do it. Number 4, practice, practice, practice. Don't just listen, practice. Practice is how you're going to succeed. Thank you very much for joining me for this introduction to the speaking section of our course. Good luck, and I'll be talking. Hi there. In this lecture, we're going to be going over some really good advice, tips, strategies, and advice that cover all 3 parts of the IELTS speaking test. You're going to hear some great advice from some examiners, former examiners on the IELTS, and they're going to give you some really, really good advice I'm going to share with you. And then also you're going to get my expert advice on the speaking section. So let's go ahead and move forward. Make sure that you're taking notes, and let's go ahead and really take this in because I want you guys to do a great job on the IELTS speaking section. And the key to doing that is being able to master and apply this advice you're going to get in this lecture. So part 1 is known to be pretty easy. It's basically a warm-up. But I would say that you have to really, really do well in part number 1. A lot of students mess up because they just start off very, very slowly. And that's a big, big mistake. You want to be able to start off in part number 1 and do well right away. Part number 2, from the different examiners that I've talked to over the years, is where they really get a chance to see how good you can speak, how well you can speak. Part number 2 is really the score determiner. So if you want to do well on the speaking section, if you want to move up into that band 8, band 9 section or realm, according to the rubric, do great at part 2. Part 2 impresses them. Part number 3, they're making their final decision. You know, if you do a great job on part number 3, that might give you that little bit of extra boost to push you where you need to be able to go. Now, here's some more just, again, basic general advice about the different sections. In part number 1, what you want to do, give a direct answer, extend it, and then explain. Then stop, smile, show the examiner that you're ready to move on to the next question. Don't just ramble on and on and on and on, and where the examiner has to stop you every single time. In part number 2, one of the best ways to think about it is that you're telling a story, right? Tell a story. And keep in mind, the truth does not matter. They're grading you on how you say something, not what you say. In part number 3, some really good advice, just practice writing out your answers. Write out your answers, and when you write out your answers, include some of the natural fluency markers when you're doing your writing. In addition, to do well in part number 3, practice with a partner. Practice being able to give those really extended answers in part number 3. The questions in part 1 and part 3 are similar, except in part 3, the questions are longer and they have more complex vocabulary. So in part number 3, you're expected to answer directly, extend your answer again, and then maybe explain or give an alternative scenario to extend that answer. They really are looking for you to give deep, well thought out answers. Again, it's not about the ideas. You have to be within the context of the question, but it's all about how you say it. Now, let's go ahead and move on and talk about a few more things that could be helpful to you during the IELTS speaking section. Sometimes students ask me, is it okay to ask them to repeat a question? Yes, it's okay. but you cannot do that 4 and 5 times. Can you please repeat that? Could you please say that question again for me? If you're always doing that, it's going to seem like you don't understand English very well. If you do it once or twice, that's okay. I mentioned earlier about speaking spontaneously. The graders are not going to be impressed. They are going to be very impressed if you're using speech that shows automaticity, right? That shows that you can speak spontaneously. Speaking spontaneously sounds more natural. I can always tell when a student is really memorizing or giving a memorized answer. Now, at the top here, you see that I have something about speaking with abstract nouns and ideas. Using abstract nouns and ideas is a really good way to show the grader that you have very strong vocabulary. There's a great video on this, and I mentioned it at the top, that talks about abstract nouns and ideas. First impressions. Examiners are human beings, which means that they can be impressed. And so your first impression is really important. If you really start off just with a strong start, that's going to stay with the examiner throughout the rest of your speaking test. And finally, be emotional in your speaking. Native speakers have an emotional content when they're speaking. A lot of times when I'm listening to a non-native speaker, they don't have that emotional content, and it doesn't sound natural, and that actually ends up with a lower score. A few more things to mention. I mentioned number 1 earlier about how, not what. Mimic native speakers. When you're listening to me during this section of the course, it's okay for you to stop, back up, listen to what I said, and repeat how I said it. Mimicking native speakers is a great way to really improve your pronunciation. Also, this third one here, in terms of speak with punctuation. Let me explain that. What that means to speak with punctuation is when you're speaking, there are periods, there are commas, there are semicolons, right? Speak with punctuation. A lot of students mess up because they just run through their sentences. They literally just run through their sentences. No punctuation at all. That equals a lower score. And finally, use a speech-to-text program. These are great because the program actually writes out what you're saying, and it gives you an opportunity to really look back at that information and look for areas where you can really improve. Moving on, practice like the real exam. Practice like the real exam. If you just sit in your room by yourself and answer questions to yourself, you're not doing real practice. You're not practicing like the exam. This next one, in terms of speaking English, let me be clear about what I'm talking. Let me explain myself better when I'm talking about speak English. If your exam is coming up in 2 to 3 weeks, what you really need to do is just speak English all the way up to the date of your exam, when it's possible. Now, of course, if you have people in your family that don't speak English, you're not going to be able to really do that. But the more that you're speaking English, the better your fluency is going to be, and also your pronunciation. So speak English. Structure your responses. This kind of goes in line with what I said in terms of speaking with punctuation. You want to give a structured response, structured answers. Don't just ramble and babble on because you're going to lose coherence. And finally, learn to recover. What I mean by learn to recover is everybody messes up sometimes. Everybody does. Even when I'm practicing, I might mess up. But what you have to be able to do is you have to recover quickly. If you think about how you just messed up, you're going to mess up on the next question. Be confident, prepare, speak naturally, and record and transcribe. In terms of these 4, I'm going to really talk a little bit about being confident because there's nowhere on the rubric where it says, oh, he gets a better score for being confident. But very often, like I said, the examiners are human beings. And there's really nothing more impressive than a confident speaker. Sometimes when you're a confident speaker, it sometimes helps hide some of those mistakes that you make. So really try to be confident when you're speaking. Now, here are some great tips on what not to do. Flat intonation. Flat intonation will always lead to a lower score. So what I mean by that is this. I like music because music has always been a part of my life, and I don't know what I would do if I could not listen to music every day. Now, some of you may hear that and say, okay, well, that's okay. Well, it's very flat. There was no intonation. There was no rising and falling. Native speakers have intonation. If you're flat, you're going to really hurt your score. Big words. Very often, I'll hear students use words that I would never use. Like these are really just big words that somebody looked up in a dictionary and said, I'm going to use this word. And very often what ends up happening is they use the word out of context or they use it inappropriately. Confusing grammar. On the exam, use the grammar that you have mastered, all right? Of course, saying nothing is going to damage your score. You can't just sit there silently. Don't give any memorized answers. Don't give any memorized answers, okay? We can always tell when you're giving a memorized answer, right? There's training. All examiners have training, right? So giving a memorized answer they will always be able to. I hear these memorized answers really in the beginning of part number one. Like when I ask somebody, what's your name? And they give me some really just canned, prepared answer. And I know it's something that's already prepared. And so I just immediately discount it. Don't even count it. It doesn't count towards your score. Okay? Don't parrot. Don't be a parrot. What I mean by that in terms of parroting means like repeating the question words. Don't do that. And don't rely on the examiner. Don't look for help, right? They're going to let you make mistakes. They're not going to help you. Also, don't do this. And I've talked to examiners. They don't like this. They don't like when you ask their opinion. When you finish the exam, how do you think I did? How did I do? They don't like that. Don't do that. I'm telling you, they don't like it. So don't ask them, how did you do? Thank them for their time. Get up and go. Okay? Be professional. But don't sit there and ask them, how do you think I did? They don't like it. Now, here's some great advice. This advice is directly from examiners. I interviewed some examiners, and I really asked them, give me your advice to students that are taking the IELTS speaking section of the test. And number one, they said, stay on topic, right? Stay on topic. They love when you stay within the context of the question. When I hear students speaking, some of the biggest mistakes that I hear is when they ask you a question and you just ramble on outside of the context of the question. You're hurting yourself. You're hurting yourself, so don't do it. Repetition. Please don't just keep saying, actually, I really don't like music very much. Actually, the weather in my country never changes. Actually, I love going to street markets. Using idioms and figures of speech, if they're properly used, it impresses them a lot, right? You have to know about your time management. Know when to stop talking. Just keep your eyes and keep good eye contact with the examiner, because you can tell in their body language that they're getting ready to ask you a new question. And that means when you start seeing them getting ready to ask you a new question, it's time for you to wrap it up. Answering in no, you can't just answer no, right? You cannot just answer no. You can't say no and then stop. You're going to get a 4.5 or 5, maybe even a 4. Don't use any slang, right? From what I've been told by the examiners that I interviewed, do not use slang. And what we're talking about there is street slang. Now, complex sentences, every once in a while, they like to see that you can use the different sentence forms. Complex, compound, those types of sentences. Okay, now let's move into some more examiner advice. Again, this is directly from the examiners. Part number 3 is a discussion. Be mindful and don't launch into a long interrupted speech. Keep in mind in part number 3, they're saying they can stop you, jump in, ask you a question because it's a discussion. In part number 2, again, this is something they all said when I interviewed them. Part number 2 is when I start thinking about the scores. In terms of your grammar, some examiners are human beings. Some of them really care about grammar. And if you have really, really bad grammar, it's going to keep you in a range of a 5 to 6. And as I said, don't ask them how well you did at the end of a test. Here's some answers to some general questions that students have asked me over the years. What if I don't understand the question? Well, you're probably in a little bit of trouble if you don't understand the question, right? Now, you can, of course, ask the grader, well, what do you mean by that? You can do that more in part number 3. In part number 1, they really don't like it if you're asking about what do you mean by that? Because really, part number 1 questions, if you're taking the IELTS exam, you should know part number 1 questions. If you don't understand a part number 1 question, then I'm going to really wonder if you really should be doing the IELTS exam right now at this time. But if you don't understand it, really kind of look at the topic of the question and try to give some answer regarding the topic of the question. You're going to be hurt a little bit because you didn't answer the question specifically, but that's the best advice I can give you. What template phrases can I use to score high? There are no template phrases you can use, okay? Examiners recognize templates. They recognize it. It sounds prepared, and they don't like it. I'm telling you, they do not like it. What if I forget how to pronounce a word? Well, if you don't use it, number 1. If you don't know how to pronounce a word properly, don't use it. Don't say it, okay? You can always just describe the word or use a simpler word or use a synonym of the word. How should I start my answer? Well, I mean, that's a really difficult question to answer in terms of how should I start my answer. Really, the best advice I can say is paraphrase the question, right? Paraphrase the question. Be direct. Be very direct. Paraphrase the question, be very direct, explain. How can I know the correct answer? is no correct answer, right? If there can be 1,000 different answers to a question. There is no correct answer. So if you're focusing on what's the correct answer, you're focusing on the wrong thing. Now, let's talk about something that's very serious. And what I'm talking about here is overcoming test anxiety. Test anxiety, right? A lot of students, they say, oh, I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm so nervous. And when you have that kind of anxiety going into an exam, you're just you're just really setting yourself up for disaster. These are here on this page. This is just some general advice. One that I really like a lot: study in similar places. If possible, go to a similar place as the testing center and practice sometimes studying in that kind of environment, right? There's been a lot of research. There's been a lot of research that has shown that when somebody really studies in a similar setting, it helps with recall. Develop a pre-test routine. Use the same routine, right? In terms of what you eat, what you do, what you say, your mantra that you use. This one seems obvious, but I don't think most students really know how big of a difference it makes when you exercise and eat right. It really does. Eliminate the self-talk, especially during the exam. Eliminate all that negative talk, replace it with positive talk, and really learn some relaxation and focusing techniques. They really help during the exam. Okay, so thanks for listening to some of these general tips that I'm giving you, general advice that I'm giving you. Hello, and thank you for joining us in this speaking section of our course. In these next 4 lectures, we're going to be covering the different band descriptors that you're graded on for the speaking section. For the IELTS exam, in regards to the speaking, you are marked or graded on your fluency and coherence, your lexical ability, which means vocabulary, grammar accuracy, and also your pronunciation. So in this lecture right now, we're going to go over the qualities that will make up a really good fluency score. In order to do that, I'm going to really break down and explain to you what this section of the rubric means. That way, you'll know what you need to do to be able to score very well. Okay, let's start. So, first of all, when we're talking about fluency and coherence, fluency refers to how well you can talk without pausing or hesitation or interruption. That's what fluency is. So if you're talking and there are a lot of when you're doing that, or you have a lot of pausing in your speech, then that's going to hurt your fluency. Coherence is a little bit different. Okay, it's a little bit different. Coherence really deals with how well your ideas make sense together. Okay, now you've heard me say before, they're not grading you on what you say, but they are grading you on if your ideas actually fit together. Okay, do your ideas fit together? So really understanding the difference between fluency and coherence and what they mean is very, very helpful. That's why I'm always trying to caution a student from really rambling on, and especially in section 1. Some students just ramble on and on and on, and eventually what ends up happening is your ideas lose their coherence. They stop fitting together. They stop making sense together, and you're hurting your grade. Now, here is directly from the rubric, and it's really, really important that you really kind of know what the difference is, right? If you're getting a 6 in terms of fluency and coherence, that means that sometimes you lose coherence. And the reason why is because there's occasional repetition, a lot of self-correction, or you're using a lot of connectives and discourse markers, but not always using them correctly. And then if you read for band 6 and for band 7, for band 8, for band 9, you can see the differences. When you move up to band number 8, it says you speak fluently with only occasional repetition or self-correction, right? So you have to be able to really, really fit within the context of that band score. Right, now, when we're talking about coherence, when you're getting a high band score, there's rare or occasional self-correction. If there's any hesitation, it's related to content, not related to words. Okay, when it says related to content, that means that you're thinking of an idea or coming up with an idea, not hesitation related to words. Also, for a high band, you're able to use a range of connectives and discourse markers. When they hear you repeating the same ones over and over and over again, you're hurting your score. You can see down there, for a low band score, a lot of repetition, slow speech, complex speaking causes you problems. Now, speed. Okay, if you want to really do well on the fluency score, then you really should have speed that's close to a native speaker. Now, I'm going to tell you something that's really important. When I'm talking about speed, I'm not talking about speaking really, really fast, because very often that's what some people think. It means speaking really, really fast. Most native speakers don't really speak very fast. Okay, so it doesn't mean speaking really fast, because when you do that, very often you lose you really hurt your pronunciation. In terms of low fluency scores, when it comes to speed, if you're really slow in creating your sentences, or if you have really poor automaticity, which means that it takes a while for the word to come from your head to out of your mouth. This happens a lot when people are translating from their native tongue into English. Now, are your ideas logical and easy to follow? Are they logical and easy to follow? Right? When you're speaking, I hear people speak sometimes, and then by the time they finish their sentence, I have no idea what they were talking about, because it logically is not put together very well, right? Or it's not easy to follow. If you're speaking and you're talking like this, I like music because it's a great way for me to be able to relax and take my mind off of things, right? That sentence becomes really hard to follow. It becomes really, really hard to follow. In terms of where you see this a lot, in terms of a low score, in terms of fluency, in terms of logic and easy to follow, it really happens in part number 2. That's where I really hear from students where there are a lot of gaps in their reasoning and their logic. There's no order, right? There's poor connection of the ideas. It really shows up in part number 2. And that's why part number 2 is so impressive to a lot of graders. Can you speak without much effort, right? What they mean by this in terms of a high score is your answer not broken or self-interrupted? Again, low score is all the ums and hesitations. So how can you increase your fluency and coherence? Number 1, use some great discourse markers. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. Of course, your repetition and speed. Learn some phrases so you can be able to extend your answers. In fact, as a matter of fact, what I mean by that is, right? Learn some phrases that will help you to extend your answers. When you're able to extend your answers, it shows more fluency. And then also decrease the hesitation and the pausing. Record yourself. Listen to yourself. Say it again. Keep saying it over and over and over until you can get through a sentence without the pausing and hesitation. That's why also in one of the earlier videos I mentioned about you speaking English almost 24 hours a day, 2 or 3 weeks before you take the exam. Speak English. Now, some people might say to me, well, I don't have anybody at home to speak English with. Sometimes you just have to maybe go to people in your family and just tell them, hey, you're going to ask me a question sometimes. Sometimes I'm going to answer that question in English. I know you're not going to understand me. I know you're not going to have any idea what I'm saying, but I just have to practice answering sometimes in English. And then, of course, you can answer again, in your native tongue. But just that's what you have to do sometimes, right? Make the best of your situation. Everybody doesn't have a perfect situation. And what you have to do is make the best of the situation that you have. Now, here are some general discourse markers. As I was saying, anyway, here the thing is, to tell you the truth at the end of the day, right? These are different common discourse markers. Now, with discourse markers, it needs to be natural, okay? Don't force it. And don't say a discourse marker. You don't have to say a discourse marker in every sentence. Now, in some of the examples that I'm going to give you, you might see me use a discourse marker, in 2 or 3 different sentences. The reason why I'm doing that is I'm just trying to show you how a lot of them are used in context. But what I'm telling you, and I want you to listen very, very closely, is that I don't want you using them too many. Don't overuse them. The graders don't like that, okay? And many times what you're doing is you're just showing the ability. You're revealing, hey, I can do this. And then you know what else? I can do that, okay? Here's an example of some discourse markers in context, right? So the first question says, does your name have any special meaning? Well, actually, it does. Naima is an Arabic name that means paradise. Next question. What are some places of interest in your town? To tell you the truth, Marrakesh has too many exciting features to name. The primary reason that visitors come to Marrakesh is for the Medina. In addition, some tourists use Marrakesh as a launching point to visit the desert located in Merzouga. Do you like your hometown? Certainly. I love Marrakesh. Actually, we have the best of both worlds in that a visitor can experience the old Amazigh way of life in the nearby villages and take part in the modernization that has occurred in Marrakesh. So the purpose of this was just to really show you how you use some of these discourse markers within context. Discourse markers are used really in speaking because that's just the natural way that native speakers, when they're talking with each other, they use discourse markers. You hear it all the time. Here are some more. Do you work or are you a student? Right. Well, Until last August 2018, I was seeking a master's in computer science, but since graduating, I have been working in my field of computer science. Currently, I'm employed by the IBM New Products Division located in Accra, Ghana. What do you dislike about your job? I'm glad you brought that up because actually I was just thinking about the pros and cons of my employment. At the end of the day, I like 90% of my work, but I would have to say that I disapprove of the long working hours and the unusual schedule that results from us having to work with clients in Japan. Would you consider changing your job in the future? I'm glad you brought that up because I was recently considering the pros and cons of my employment. Right. So again, this is actually a repeat of the previous answer. We're not going to repeat that actually. All right. Here are some methods to be able to really extend your answers. Okay. Get used to using the future tense, will, be, or going to. Number 2, add reasons. Always explain why. Don't just answer it and stop. Explain why. Compare things to the past. I used to love sugary desserts, but since the diabetes diagnosis, I've had to cut them out of my diet. Number 4, combine details together. I live in an apartment, right? Don't say like I live in an apartment. I live there with my friend. I also live there with my cousin. Last month, I moved in with a stranger. Don't speak in those short little simple sentences. It's much more impressive if you say, I live in a flat with my cousin, friend, and stranger that I just met last month. Use contrast and also share your feelings. Always explain how you feel. Thank you very much for listening to this lecture on fluency. And next, we're going to move into the lexical component. So I'll talk to you soon. Okay, so you've just learned all the information you need to know about how to really improve your fluency coherence score. Now we're going to move into the next area on the rubric band, and that is the lexical resource. Lexical resource basically means your vocabulary. And in this lecture, I'm going to cover the basics of the band and also explain the different parts to you so that you really know how to improve your lexical score when it comes to speaking. At the end of this lecture, you'll know exactly what you need to do to be able to get a great lexical score on the speaking test. Again, as in the previous video, here are the band score descriptors. And really, you can really look at just some of the differences. So for example, for a band 7, it says use vocabulary resources flexibly, some less common vocabulary and idioms. Then for an 8, it says uses a wide vocabulary resource readily and flexibly to convey precise meaning. Okay. Then for a 9, use the vocabulary with full flexibility, not just wide, full flexibility and precision in all topics. Okay. And now the examiners are trained to be able to tell the differences between when somebody's band 6, 7, 8, or 9. They're trained. They have very specific training to be able to recognize where you're fitting on that band scale. So here's some ways to improve your lexical resource. Number 1 is so important, and it deals with using subject-specific vocabulary. If the topic is about language, you should be using specific vocabulary about language. If the topic is about street markets, you should be using specific vocabulary in that area of street markets. If the topic is the weather, use specific subject-specific vocabulary. That really impresses a grader. If you're just using general, basic level words, you're not going to seem that impressive. Paraphrasing, synonyms, and collocations, right? Graders love this. Paraphrase. Synonyms really increase the flexibility and precision of what you're talking about. And native speakers use a lot of collocations. Collocations can be kind of tricky in terms of learning because these are just when you have 2 or 3 words that are put together in a way that native speakers use them. And this takes time for you to really listen to a lot of native speakers, really read up on collocations. That's why practicing is so important. And then you got to find other ways to say really common words. You really can't use words like good, bad, very, important, give, get. A lot of those really common words, they don't help your score out at all. Now, In terms of, how to expand your lexical resource, like a wide range, a band 6 or 7 is using a sufficient range. Now you might ask, what's the difference? What's the difference between a wide range and a sufficient range? Well, I mean, like I said, the examiners are really trained for that. They're trained for that. Wide range just means that, on all the different topics, you've been able to show a range of vocabulary. A sufficient range means if there are 4 different topics, on maybe 2 or 3 of the different topics that they ask you about, you're able to show range. All right. Now, in terms of, are you using a low or wide range? Really, when you talk about a high band score, are you really using vocabulary that's outside of everyday interactions? Speak on and talk about abstract topics. Low-level students, right, this ability is really evident in parts 2 and 3. Most people can really get by in part number 1 because it's really straightforward questions. But really, low-level lexical ability really reveals itself in parts 2 and 3. That's why I've told you, part number 2 is really what's that's the mark. How is your paraphrasing, right? When we talk about paraphrasing at a high level, can you use synonyms? Can you change sentence structure? Can you really just convey the same meaning with different words? Or are you using the exact same words as the question? How's your collocation ability? Can you collocate in the same way as a native speaker, right? Can you self-correct any collocation mistakes? That's impressive also. A lot of times I hear a lot of mistakes in students with their word combinations, and that really deals with collocation. Now, when we're talking about a few more tips or advice, in terms of synonyms, this is what I mean by synonyms. First sentence, my car needs gas. My vehicle requires petrol. Okay? Changing the word order. English is increasingly used, so minor languages will vanish. What I mean by change the word order? Minor languages will disappear because more choose English as their primary language. Switching up the word order. Also changing the word form is a way to paraphrase. The local population has poor health from lack of exercise. The city residents are unhealthy due to hardly ever exercising. Changing word form is important. It's impressive, showing that you have that ability. I'm not going to read through these. You can stop it right here, but this is what I mean by subject-specific vocabulary. This is subject-specific vocabulary about sports, subject-specific vocabulary about employment. Subject-specific vocabulary really impresses a grader. Idioms. These are some of the general idioms. Some of the most 25 most useful idioms for IELTS speaking. If you're able to really show that you can mix some of these in while you're speaking, it's very helpful. These are some more common idioms that are being used. Right? On this list here, which is really interesting, you're going to hear about natural versus unnatural collocations. And I hear these mistakes all the time. On the left side, we have the natural collocations. On the right side, we have the unnatural collocations. Now, are the words correct? Quick. If somebody says quick food, do I know what they're talking about? Yes, I do. Is it the wrong collocation? Yes, it is. You say fast food. You don't say the quick train, you say the fast train. You don't say, I'm going to go grab a fast breakfast. No, I'm going to grab a quick breakfast. You don't say it was big fun. It was great fun. I hear this one a lot. I don't want to do this because I'll lose the time. That's the improper collocation. Waste time. Commit a mistake, correct. Commit a mistake is wrong. Make a mistake is correct. How do you really learn collocations? Well, you really learn them in blocks of language, right? There actually are dictionaries and there are books that really just cover collocations, just so you can really learn collocations, right? Whenever you learn new vocabulary, learn the different ways that new vocabulary is collocated. That's the best one way. Practice immediately. When you learn collocations, practice using them. Practice using them throughout the day. If you do that, you'll learn how to use them. And learn collocations in group, family, weather, or learn them in terms of specific words. Do, make, take. Expanding beyond like and don't like, a lot of the questions, especially on part 1, are going to ask you about, do you like reading? Do you like music? Do you like to go shopping? But you can't always just say like, don't like, don't like, don't like. There are many different ways to say it. I'm very much interested in traveling. I'm quite fond of traveling outside the USA. I'm really into traveling. I'm very passionate about traveling. I'm quite addicted to traveling. I'm keen on traveling in every opportunity. All those are different ways you can say like. Alternatives to don't like. I loathe the activity of shopping. I'm not a fan of shopping. Shopping is not my cup of tea. In fact, it drives me crazy. I can't bear to go shopping. I can't stand shopping on the weekends. I'm not that keen on shopping this weekend. I'm rarely thrilled about shopping, right? Those are different ways to say don't like. Thank you very much for listening to this video. We appreciate it. And now we're going to move on and talk about grammar. Talk to you soon. Okay, at this point, I hope you're feeling much, much better. So now you've learned about how to really manage yourself in regards to fluency, coherence, and also your lexical ability. Now, in this lecture, we're going to hit on the finer points of grammar accuracy and range. Grammar is really comes to doing very well on the speaking section of the course. You want to truly master your foundational grammar because it's very impressive to an examiner when you're able to speak with mistake-free sentences. Let me say this about grammar. When you actually get into the exam, when you actually are starting your real exam with the examiner, don't worry about your grammar at that point. At that point, whatever grammar you know, you know. Because very often what happens is students get very self-conscious of their grammar during the exam, and they end up hurting their score in regards to pronunciation, fluency, coherence, and also their lexical ability. So now let's move forward, and I'll explain the band descriptor for grammar, and I hope at the end of this lecture, you'll have a really good idea of what you need to do to score well. Right, so grammar range, we're dealing with, really probably the best way I can explain this is really when you look at the difference between a basic level English student and an advanced level English student. A basic level English student uses a lot of simple sentences, and sometimes they can use a compound sentence correctly. An advanced level student is able to really do the four main sentence types very well, meaning the simple, the compound, the complex, and the compound complex sentences. They also can use words like, or you use, combinations like not only but also, both and. They can speak in the conditionals. They can use the relative clauses very well. So when you talk about bands 8 and 9 in terms of grammar, range, being able to use them flexibly. Also, what's really impressive to graders is when you're able to speak in mistake-free sentences. If you're making grammar errors in every single sentence, you're going to have a hard time getting a really great score. Also, one thing that's really helpful is to be strong in your foundation, your foundational level skills, right? Your foundational grammar. When the examiner hears mistakes in basic level grammar, it doesn't bode well for getting a really high score on the rubric in terms of grammar. So here are some ways to improve your grammatical range, right? Like I said earlier, master those four sentence types. Master the proper verb tense. A lot of the questions are going to be in the past tense. Sometimes it's in the present and future also. But use the verb tense that's proper for the question, okay? Also, if you really want to score well, show that you can do the perfect tenses. Also, maybe be able to change how you start a sentence. Sometimes you might start a sentence with a prepositional phrase. Sometimes you might start with a gerund. Also show the ability to shift your parts of speech, change the part of speech. These are all different ways that you can improve your grammatical range. Now, there's one thing to understand theoretically what I'm talking about, and you're actually being able to do it under time pressure. That's why really practicing under pressure, simulating the real exam is so important. Now, graders, like I said, they love mistake-free sentences. Love it. Also, in terms of this number 2, one thing that I want to tell you guys to really work on is your parallelism. And your parallelism deals with you being able to give a list, most of the time giving a list of items. I have so many mistakes in parallelism, right? And passive structures and relative pronouns. Just be mindful, okay? Always practice like it's the real exam. Always use correct grammar. Sometimes I hear students say, oh, yeah, I know I messed up on my grammar, but I'm just practicing. Well, the way you practice is the way you're going to perform on the exam, right? Are you using basic or advanced structures? I talked about this already. At the top, you see some of the higher level structures, the simple sentences, just using the simple past and the simple present. Also, heavy be verb use. If all of your sentences are using is, are, was, were, has, have, having, be, being, am, if you're using a lot of be verbs, it makes you sound like you are a lower level speaker. What does it mean to be mistake-free, right? Mistake-free does not mean perfect. It just means that sometimes you have some isolated mistakes here or there, but you frequently provide sentences that are mistake-free. frequently doing that. Okay? When you talk about mistake-free at a lower level, is where you also are revealing a lot of just systematic foundational errors. Like in every single sentence, there's a subject-verb agreement mistake. Or every single sentence, there are mistakes in terms of word choice or word form. On here, you can see on here the 4 sentence types. And what I tried to do here was just use the same sentence topic over and over again so you can see the difference. Simple sentence. Hard work is necessary for success. Compound sentence. Hard work is important and it has advantages for all who partake. Complex sentence. Hard work is important because it enables anyone to surpass their goals. Compound complex sentence. Hard work is important and it is beneficial for everyone because it enables them to surpass their goals. Okay? If you have mastery over these 4 types, you're in really good shape. Okay? So how do we expand our grammar range? Look here. Do you live in a big city or a small town? Band 5. I am making my home in a big city. Band 7. I'm making my home in Casablanca, a sprawling city located in the center of Morocco. Band 9. For 2 years and counting, I've been making my home in Casablanca, a sprawling metropolis located in the center of Morocco, and I plan to remain settled in this city for the foreseeable future. Do you see the difference? Right? Here, when we're talking about expanding your grammatical range and changing the parts of speech, right? So look at this question here. Why do some people leave their job? Employees can choose a different line of work for various reasons. If a worker's salary fluctuates slightly from month to month, the wage earner might seek employment elsewhere. This slight fluctuation in salary can make a big difference if a staff member has a household to manage. When we talk about changing parts of speech, we're talking about going from fluctuate slightly to slight fluctuation. That's impressive. Being able to do that within the context of the exam, showing how you can shift parts of speech, that's what we're talking about there. Relative pronouns. Relative pronouns really help you to put sentences together, to combine information, right? So I see a lot of students just speaking in these short, little, simple sentences. When you do that, you're not helping yourself, right? People want to know, how can I move up the band? That's what you're always trying to do. You're always trying to move up the rubric. So on the left there, you can read about this. These are just some definitions of what a relative is of not changing jobs. Band 5-6, workers like security. Workers like relationships. These things make them feel they have a better chance not getting fired. So they do not change jobs. Now, are all those sentences grammatically correct? Yes, they are. Are they band 5 to 6 sentences? Yes, they are. Because you're just not able to put information together, to combine details together. That's a higher skill level. So look here. Employees who desire security and long-term relationships have a lower risk of termination and therefore maintain their current employment. Much, much better, much higher level work. Parallelism. There's a definition of parallelism on the left. All right, here are some student responses using parallelism so you can understand what I'm talking about. How can an employee be successful at work? Incorrect. Plan their day, working long hours, and they never give up. This is wrong because we have 3 different types of grammar structure. We have the infinitive, a gerund, and a full clause. That is not proper parallelism. That's why you're not able to move above a band 7. Correct. Successful people tend to plan their day, work long hours, and never give up. That is proper parallelism. Prepositional phrases, right? Starting with prepositional phrases. Here we go. Since the beginning of the 2000s, cell phone technology has advanced by leaps and bounds. After the next decade, will be far too late to initiate any change in our current direction towards extinction. With regards to the idea that the planet will heal itself, that may be true, but it can also entail it also can entail our no longer existing as a part of that healing process. Here are all of your verb tenses here, and I put it in a really simple form, right? Just so you can really understand. 12, right? There's 12 verb tenses. Show that you can use those perfect tenses. Thank you very much for listening to this video. And now we're going to move into the last part about how to really score well on the IELTS speaking tests in regards to 10 descriptors. You've really learned the finer points of fluency and coherence, lexical ability, and grammar range and accuracy. So now we're going to get into the final section on the rubric, which deals with the area of pronunciation. Now, pronunciation is really, really a high level skill in terms of teaching it. So we're not going to really get so much into teaching you pronunciation, but more of just really explaining to you the finer points of the rubric so that you understand what you need to do well, to achieve a great score in regards to pronunciation. So I hope by the end of this lecture, you'll have a greater grasp on what it means to have great pronunciation on the IELTS speaking test. So let's get started. These are the band descriptors in terms of pronunciation. And what I want you to do here is kind of read through them. Notice some of the small differences with pronunciation. And if you have any questions about, well, what does this mean? What's really the difference between a band? You see band 7 is skipped here. That's because for band 7, it says has all the aspects of band 6, has some of the aspects of band 8. That's why band 7 is skipped. Right? So when we talk about pronunciation, how much effort is there needed to understand your speech? If you're easily understood and your accent rarely interferes with clarity, your pronunciation is at a high level. If you have a lot of mispronunciations and a lot of if you have a lot of muddled speech, that was just an example of muddled speech, everybody. Muddled speech, if somebody doesn't understand you because your speech is muddled, right, that hurts your pronunciation. Now, what to work on for proper pronunciation? Number one, work on your clarity of speech. Don't worry about accent. Be clear. Have very clear speech. Next, learn how to work on word stress and sentence stress. If you've heard me say sentences so far, you've heard me use word stress. You've heard me use sentence stress. Also, intonation. Speaking English is very musical in nature. What I mean by that is there are natural rises and falls throughout a sentence. It's not flat. Chunking. Native speakers really chunk their words. Later on, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later so you can kind of get the idea. But chunking really shows, hey, you have native speaker quality. A lot of times when I hear students that aren't able to chunk, that's the reason why you're not getting above a 7. That's the reason why. That's why you're stuck. Because when you're not able to chunk, that means you're just saying each word individually. And that's not how native speakers speak. On your individual and weak sounds and also your rhythm. How to improve your pronunciation? Well, number one, move your mouth. You cannot speak English very well with a closed mouth. Also, work on your specific practice. If you know you have TH sounds, work on that. If you know you have V and W sounds, work on that. You've heard me talk about this earlier. Model native speakers. Listen and repeat. Copy the speed, right? Copy the emotion in the words. Copy the intonation. Also, use contractions. When you look at a lot of the examples that I'm going to give you, when we get into part number 1 and part number 2 and so forth and so on, when I'm giving the examples, you're going to see me really using contractions. Now, I'm not about to teach you intonation, okay? But I am going to talk about just some general rules when it comes to intonation. When you're giving a statement, it has a falling intonation. When you're giving a list, it's rising, 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 falling. When you're using your WH words, it's a falling, your what, where, when, falling intonation. Yes or no questions, rising intonation. And that's at the bottom you see the name, that person really gives some really great videos on intonation and pronunciation. It was a poor intonation. For example, this is a statement. It's quite a small village. Now, you heard me say it correctly with the intonation falling at the end. Incorrect. It's quite a small village, right? That rising intonation makes it sound like a question or you don't know what you're talking about, right? All kinds of jobs. That's correct. But here, some of the most common ones are accounting, banking, teaching, IT. Again, wrong intonation makes it sound like a question instead of a statement. This is some information you can review here about intonation in terms of falling and rising intonation. Okay. Word stress, sentence stress. Word stress is syllable stress. It's the beat on one or more syllables within a word itself. Sentence stress is the beat of certain words within a sentence. Okay. There's some great videos on YouTube about sentence stress that you can watch and kind of learn about that. Right. Sentence stress is so important because that's what really gives your speech rhythm. When a great is talking about your speech has rhythm or your speech doesn't have rhythm, they're talking about proper sentence stress. Now, which words do we stress? You stress content words. You do not stress function words. Here, you can see a list of content words and you can see a list of function words. Right? Here's some examples of content and function words in context. Okay? Will you sell my car because I've gone to Ghana? I'm going to tell you about an advert I saw last week. A mother played with her kid. He's interested in taking an economics class. She wanted to play better. Also, sentence stress changes the meaning, right? The woman speaks a little Japanese. The woman speaks a little Japanese. The woman speaks a little Japanese, right? Stressing different words in that one sentence completely changes the meaning. Here, photograph, photographer, photographic, right? Changing the word stress properly. You can read through this chart for a little bit more information on word stress. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about what it means to do chunking, right? Chunking means dividing speech into groups of words when we talk. Without chunking, it can be really, really hard for people to understand you. So let's look at an example, right? Below are two answers to the question, in your country, what kind of possessions do you think give status to people? Here's answer one. Now, it's difficult for me because I just naturally chunk, but I'm going to try to kind of read this without any chunking so that you can get the idea of what we're talking about. The first thing that comes to mind is the car, and this is because in my country, a lot of people like to have luxury cars such as BMW and Audi vehicles to show their status. In other words, the more expensive the car, the higher the place in society. That's what it sounds like when a non-native speaker is speaking sometimes. It's without any chunking at all. Now, this is more of what it sounds like when you're chunking. You're saying these groups of words and then there's a pause, right? And then there's another pause. And that's why I've told you, you heard me say this earlier. You have to be able to speak with pronunciation. I mean, not speak with pronunciation, speak with punctuation. So here's the second part. The first thing that comes to mind is the car. And this is because in my country, a lot of people like to have luxury cars, such as to show their status. In other words, the more expensive the car, the higher their place in society. Did you hear the difference? That's the difference in terms of chunking and not chunking. Let's look at another example. What does climate have to do with building homes? Okay, again, give me a moment. I'm going to take a breath, and because I have to say this without any chunking, and that's not natural. In my opinion, climate has a lot to do with the way we construct and design our residence. For example, in tropical countries, the houses are usually built to keep the sun out, while in places where it snows a lot, you find houses with steep roofs so that the snow can't settle there and damage the roof. Right? That's just reading. That's just going directly through. No chunking at all. Here it is with chunking. In my opinion, climate has a lot to do with the way we construct and design our residence. For example, in tropical countries, the houses are usually built to keep the sun out, while in places where it snows a lot, you find houses with steep roofs so that the snow can't settle there and damage the roof. That's what chunking is. That's what native speakers do. If you're able to chunk properly, that's how you really increase your score. Here's one more example of chunking versus non-chunking. Right? I'm just going to read the chunking one, okay? Does it really matter whether people speak with an accent as long as they can be easily understood? Many people now believe that in an increasingly globalized world, we should accept variations in pronunciation, that is, accent. However, there's no point in speaking with an accent if people can't understand you, is there? Right? So how can you improve your chunking? Look for listening texts that actually include the audio script, and as you listen, kind of locate and mark the pauses in the audio script. I think that's some of the best advice. Listen to books on tape, right? Those are some things you can do to really help improve your chunking. Thank you very, very much. Have a fantastic day, and I look forward to your joining me as we now are going to enter into speaking part number 1. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.
So before moving ahead for today, let's take a quick break and we'll be back soon. And we'll try to continue with task 1 today and move on with task 2 if time permits, and then later on we'll see how it goes. Okay. Thank you everyone. Stay tuned.